This is the KC Show. I'm Kyle Cushman, and welcome inside the Vancouver Goldeneyes season preview. Their first game is tonight, if you're watching this the day this is posted, against, of course, the Seattle Torrent, their fellow expansion team. What an offseason this has been. Such a fun expansion process if you're a Vancouver fan, such a terrifying expansion process if you're a fan of any other team. For Vancouver, such a great approach to the expansion process with Kara Gardner-Murray there, and then the hiring of Brian Adolski. I love the mix that they have in their management and coaching staff, and then the roster they've put together between their picks in expansion, the signings they made in that signing period, and then the players they snagged in free agency. The most exciting roster in the PWHL of this upcoming season, because we don't know what it looks like on the ice, and they have so many exciting high-end talents on this roster. So without further ado, let's dive in to this season preview. We don't have any ins and outs to preview because everybody's an in and nobody's out. Except, I guess, Denisa Shisheva, because she was traded. But technically speaking, nobody is out from last season, of course, because there was no last season for the Vancouver Goldeneyes. So let's start with my 5 big questions. First one being about star player Sarah Nurse, probably the face of the franchise in terms of the biggest star power. You might say the face is maybe like a Jen Gardner, or maybe a local product. But I think the face of the franchise to begin is Sarah Nurse because of the star power and her name value and everything there. So the question for me, and the first big question here, is can she be an MVP level player? And most importantly, can she stay healthy? When Sarah Nurse has been healthy, she's been that upper echelon type player. In year number 1, she ranked second in the league in scoring, and then had a broken finger late in the season. Wasn't as effective in the playoffs. Last season, pretty good start to the season, not like that super high end, but still pacing to be like a top 5, top 10 scorer in the league. Gets injured at the rivalry series, ironically enough, by her teammate with the Scepters, Jessie Comfer, on an awkward collision. Misses time, comes back, is not nearly as effective down the stretch. Again, fails to score a goal in the playoffs. Even less so than can she be that MVP candidate? Can she just stay healthy and have that full season, get to the playoffs without any lingering or significant injuries over the course of the season, and be the kind of player we know she can be in the playoffs? It's going to be a grind of a season between the travel, the international play, of course, at the Olympics, everything there. But in speaking with Sarah this offseason, I'm very excited to see what she can do this season in Vancouver, because it is a fresh start for her. She thought she would play her entire career in Toronto, dating back to the Furies and then through the PWHPA, and then with the Scepters. It's all been Toronto for Sarah Nurse, and that's kind of what you expected it would always be. And even after the first year, if there was expansion after the first season, I think there's a darn good chance that she would have been one of the 3 protections, if not a guarantee she would have been one of the 3 protections for the Scepters. But after year 2, after the injury concern, after not scoring a goal in both playoffs, all of that, they opted to go in a different direction in terms of the 3 protection slots, opened up the opportunity for Nurse to go west. I think it's going to be a great opportunity for her to gain a different perspective out there, receive coaching and advice from a big different group of players and people in the coaching staff. I'm super excited to see what Brian Adolski can do for her in her career. All of that, I'm very excited for Sarah Nurse and to see what she can do going forward with this new opportunity. But it all revolves around her staying healthy. And if she stays healthy, I think she can be that MVP level type player, a player that finishes top 5 in league scoring, that finishes tops of scoring on the Toronto Scepters, that leads them on the power play, all those types of things. I think that's what Sarah Nurse's expectations are. I think that's what they should be. And I think that's the level she can get to, again, if she stays healthy. Just seeing some of the things come out of Vancouver after the preseason games, I'm really intrigued and excited about the connection of Nurse with Michelle Karvinen. It's one of the players she mentioned in my conversation with her this offseason about the player that she's one of the players she's most excited to play with this season, because she's never had the opportunity to play again with her, only against her on the international stage. And I think those two could have some interesting chemistry together as well. So that's my first big question for the Goldeneyes in their first season. What do we get from Sarah Nurse? Can she stay healthy? Can she be that MVP level candidate? To question number 2 for me, and just speaking about Michelle Karvinen, will she adjust to the PWHL better than the other SDHL imports? Of course, Michelle Karvinen is not your typical first round pick. 35 years old, all-time leading scorer at the World Championship for Team Finland, a storied resume that has her honestly with an intriguing Hockey Hall of Fame resume, to be quite honest, just given her longevity and what she's done on the European stage. But coming to North America, we've seen the adjustment be very difficult for SDHL players, in particular, some higher end scoring players in the SDHL. You look last season and some of the players that came over from the SDHL. The top scorer among that first year group was actually Ronja Savalainen, a defender with the Ottawa Charge, ended up being protected in the expansion process, but with only 11 points in 28 games. Not exactly the highest scoring player by any means last year. She was excellent. I thought she was great last year for the Ottawa Charge in her role. But when you're talking about the top scorers coming over from Sweden in that league specifically, not Swedish players, but players coming over from the Swedish league, not exactly the most high-end scorer there in Savalainen with 11 points there. The next highest player coming over, well, was a depth pick in Shea Maloney, who had previously played collegiate, spent 1 year in Sweden, came over, had a great rookie season in kind of this more versatile role for the Boston Fleet, exceeding expectations as a later round pick. But I think the big ones that you look to is Lena Ljungblom having 3 goals and 6 points in 29 games. And then you also look at Nora Toulouse and the 1 goal and 2 points in 30 games that she had. Those 2 players, MVP level players in the SDHL previously, and to varying extents had difficulty coming over to the PWHL and continuing to be those impact players, and particularly Toulouse coming over to the PWHL and just really struggled in the top 6 opportunities she had, ended up finishing the season as like this 4th liner, barely playing, ended up actually terminating her contract to go back to Sweden. I don't think that's what we're going to see from Michelle Karvinen by any means. She's played a little bit in North America before, actually under head coach Brian Nadolski. She's a veteran. She'll play with some grittiness. She's a good goal scorer. All of those elements, I think, has her as a much more as a player that I think will have an easier transition to the league. But I still think is a big question in terms of what that impact is in the league, because you look at those players that I just mentioned and listed off, the Toulouses, the Ljungblums, even at the high end, the Maloney's and Savalainens, for a first round pick like Michelle Karvinen and being a 35-year-old and being a first round pick, you expect her impact in terms of coming over to the league immediately and making an impact to be a bit higher than some of those point totals I just mentioned there. So can she adjust to the North American game and playing day in, day out quickly? Or will she have some struggles like some of the other SDHL players that have come over last year did? I think it's more the former, where I think she's going to be good in this league right away. I think she's going to have some great chemistry with a player like Sarah Nurse. I think those two are an interesting combo, and I hope they get some runway together. I think Karvinen will be very good this season for the Goldeneyes, but it is still a question that I am intrigued to see how it plays out this season because of the struggles of some of the other SDHL imports from last season. Continuing on to my third question, and it's one about the exciting additions that the Goldeneyes have. Brooke McQuigg, Teresa Venisheva, Michaela Cava, Hannah Miller, all very exciting, very different as well pickups this offseason. 3 of those big ticket free agent, or I shouldn't say big ticket, but big name free agent additions. 3 of the top free agents available in the process. And then Brooke McQuigg, a standout on the Minnesota Frost in their Welter Cup win. But why I have them all grouped together is because of their shooting percentage last season. Brooke McQuigg, first in the PWHL in shooting percentage among regulars that got significant minutes at 20%. Teresa Venisheva, 6th at 17.2%. Michaela Cava, 7th at 17%. Miller, 8th at 16.9%. How much regression is there among that group? And are they able to still be effective if they do have some regression? So let's work bottom to the top there. Hannah Miller, I don't expect any kind of significant regression for her because in year number 1, she shot at 17.9%. She has an elite shot. It's one of the things that all of her teammates and coaches talk about. She has an elite shot from the half wall, can play the middle, can play the half wall, has a history with Brian Nadolski with Team China as well. has blossomed into this great 200-foot player that is threatening to make Team Canada at the Olympics after being with Team China previously. Such an incredible story there for Hannah Miller. One of my favorite players to watch in the league there as well. And she's proven, in my opinion, to be an elite goal scorer that can shoot at over 15% clip and consistently be in that range. Not concerned about Hannah Miller repeating that. Michaela Cavett in year number 1 shot at 11.6%, moved up the lineup after a great playoff run, shot at 17% last year. I'm expecting some regression there, but not a significant amount. I expect her to still be a pretty notable goal scorer this upcoming season. So that's 2 out of the 3 I expect to, 2 out of the 4 I expect to at least be comparable to what they did last year. Teresa Vinisheva is the one that I don't have a good read on at all. She was fantastic last year with the 15 goals, shooting at 17.2%. Obviously a chaotic player in terms of her penalties and stuff, but also had a ton of shots on goal as well. Really found her groove last season. But in year number 1, she shot 4.7% and had 2 goals on the entire season. That 2-goal jump to 15 goals, that 4.7% jump to 17.2% jump. Or sorry, to 4.7% jump to 17.2%. Where does she fall in that line? Is it a lot closer to the 5% mark? Is it a lot closer to the 17% mark? Is it somewhere in between? I think it's probably somewhere in between in that 10 to 12% mark, given what we saw last season. But if it is a lot closer to that 5% mark and she struggles to score a little bit, that's going to be something to watch, because she was one of those big free agent pickups that are projected to be an important top 6 player for the Vancouver Goldeneyes. Like, she was electric for Ottawa last year. Wasn't as productive in terms of the goal scoring in the playoffs, which again is one of those things that gives me a little twinge or a little hesitancy. But I think overall, you can still expect Vinisheva to be an effective top 6 player, even if the goal scoring falls off more towards the 8 to 10 total, even maybe a little bit less. That's a pretty significant drop in terms of her production last year. If that is the case, of course, she could go out and score 15 goals again and have her in the top 15 that I put out next year in terms of the players in the league. All that's very possible, but that significant jump from 4.7% to 17.2% last year, or over the past 2 years, gives me some pause going into the season. I still expect her to be good, of course, but I'm not sure she's going to hit quite those same goal totals this season. And then Brooke McQuaig. There's just no way she's going to finish first in shooting percentage again, right? 20%, super high clip. Even if she comes down to earth, I think she's going to be an effective player. I actually think she's going to be used in more of a bottom 6 role than kind of the complementary top 6 role she was used in Minnesota. So even if that regresses quite a bit, I'm not too concerned about that. But the question is kind of, if all those players have some significant regression or notable regression, how many of those goals can you replace by other players in the lineup? Is it a concern? Will it actually be much of a factor if the rest of the lineup is good enough? That's kind of what I'm flagging overall. Like, 4 of their notable additions this offseason, of course, through the free agency process, primarily 3 of them had significant shooting percentages last year. And we know those can fluctuate year over year, and a lot of them can be luck-based. Some of them some players are at the top of the list consistently. You look at Poulin and her shooting percentage as an example. You look at Miller's shooting percentage year over year in the PWHL so far. Those are players that have been able to back it up. It's just something I'm flagging to keep an eye on if some of those players have some slower starts, or if they have hot starts and continue on the momentum from last year. Just something I'm flagging to keep an eye on over the course of the season. Next question for me, going to the goaltending, from the forwards to all the way to the net minding. How much does Emirates Maschmeyer play this season? They have a goaltender of the year backup in Kristen Campbell, of course, making that trade on draft night, getting Campbell to come to the West Coast. Obviously a fantastic backup, considering what she did in year number 1 is just kind of the steady goaltender for Toronto. Things just went terribly for her at the end of last season. I think it's a great fresh start for Campbell. I think she's going to be a great fit alongside somebody like Emirates Maschmeyer. And I think Maschmeyer is a goaltender that can prove themselves as one of the top 3 goaltenders in the world again this season with Vancouver. The question for me is how much she plays, because in year number 1, she was a workhorse, played in 23 out of 24 games for the Ottawa Charge, or I guess then PWHL Ottawa. That workhorse thing didn't really work for her in terms of putting up the elite totals in terms of great save percentage and things like that. So last season, last offseason, I should say, they go out, they draft Gwyneth Phillips. She's the backup there, maybe takes a little bit of the workload off of her in the first half of the season. But then Maschmeyer gets hurt. Phillips takes over. We know how that story played out. For me, the question is, what's the workload look like for Maschmeyer coming back from injury after this long layoff? Does she get back to that form quickly? Does it take her a few games to find her rhythm again? How much of the split is it between Maschmeyer and Campbell? Because I think Maschmeyer is one of the top 3 goalies in the world, top 4 at minimum. I had her just behind Gwyneth Phillips in my top 15 rankings on the score this week. I could easily flip that, to be quite honest. I think those two are very close in terms of their upside as goaltenders in this league. Obviously, Phillips more longer term, shorter term for Emmerance Maschmeyer, just given some of the age difference there and kind of the experience difference. But I think Emmerance Maschmeyer, every time I've watched her with Team Canada, she's been fantastic at the rivalry series. I think her starts have been very underrated as well there. I think she's a very high-end goaltender who is a goaltender of the year caliber goaltender. But do they limit her workload in an Olympic year with her going off, obviously, to the Olympics, assuming health? Do they limit her workload because of her workload in year number 1 and then the injury in year number 2? Is it a 50-50 split because Campbell has been a starter the past 2 seasons? I'm very interested to see what that split looks like. I would go pretty significantly with Maschmeyer this season. I would use Campbell as a pretty clear-cut backup, but I do think managing her minutes between the pipes because of the injury last season, because of her numbers maybe falling off a little bit in that workhorse season, I think there's a happy medium there for Brian Adolski and the rest of the staff to find for Emmerance Maschmeyer, and I think she could absolutely end the season as the goaltender of the year. Finally, so we talked forwards quite a bit. We talked goaltender there with Maschmeyer. What about the defense group here? Well, you have 3 of the top 4 on the Walter Cup winning team last year from Minnesota, with Claire Thompson there on the top pairing, most likely with Ashton Bell, and then just plug and playing that second pairing that Minnesota had last year with Melissa Channel-Watkins and Sophie Jakes. Can this be the best defense in the league? There's a couple other defense that I think are a little more well-rounded, but the upside is there, certainly, for the Goldeneyes. Ashton Bell, I don't think we've quite seen her reach her peak game in the PWHL yet this year. And with the Olympic year and trying to push as one of those final roster spots for Team Canada and not being at the Olympic training blocks and at the rivalry series, I'm very interested to see if that motivates her to hit even higher heights here in the PWHL after 2 good seasons in Ottawa, but maybe not the highest end that we were maybe expecting from Ashton Bell coming out of college. Obviously, Claire Thompson, a Defender of the Year finalist after her first season in the PWHL after a year away. Phenomenal person, phenomenal player, a player that I could honestly see wearing the C this season for the Goldeneyes. We'll get to that a little bit later. But just overall a phenomenal player that is going to be the number 1 defender on this team, most likely, because then you get to the second pairing and Melissa Channel-Watkins, the excellent complement to Sophie Jakes. Jakes, one of the highest impact players in the league last season, elite 5-on-5 results, elite involvement percentage, elite production, all of it just superb for Sophie Jakes last year. Can she handle playing against the top competition? Does she need to be in this second pairing role where she plays a bunch, but maybe not in this shutdown pairing role? How does her game continue to develop this season in Vancouver after 2 great years in Minnesota, after a really rough start with the Boston Fleet or with PWHL Boston coming out of the draft? She's blossomed into this excellent player, Defender of the Year finalist, all of that stuff. Deserves the respect for being one of the best defenders in the PWHL, specifically in terms of their impact. I'm curious to see how that develops this season in Vancouver. So that top 4 could absolutely be the best top 4 in the league. I also look at what Toronto has, and I'm very intrigued by that mix. But certainly, I think Vancouver will view themselves as having the best defense in the league, and is specifically in that top 4 with some young players that can continue to develop, some experience there in Claire Thompson and Melissa Channel-Watkins, some good depth there with Emma Greco, Nina Jobe-Smith, who's currently injured, Sydney Bard, who had some good moments last year with Boston. I think this could be the best defense in the league. I personally rate Toronto's a little bit higher just because of Fast and Shelton being this high-end compared to or two players that I rate higher than the Thompsons and Bells and Jakes even. But with the internal development and the youth of that blue line with Jakes and Thompson there and Bell, I think that this is a group that can continue to progress from last season and could be the best group in the league going into this season and throughout this season. So now let's get to your questions, beginning with the Primary Tenant Pod. If you don't already follow them and you're a Goldeneyes fan, or even just somebody that wants to follow along with the Goldeneyes this season, you got to give them a follow, a sub on YouTube, wherever you catch your podcasts. Just a very fun podcast to listen to. And it's always great to see people getting involved in kind of the fan media experience, because it's one of the great things, seeing fans get involved in that kind of way. And it's fun as a media person as well to kind of get that side of things as well and kind of keep things a little more jovial than my numbers and analysis and all that stuff. But their question is about Anna Segedi, who of course this week was traded to Vancouver from the Minnesota Frost for Denisa Shisheva. They ask, how do you think Anna Segedi fits into this lineup? I love this fit. Just because you look at her history, and Segedi had some good numbers at St. Lawrence, but she played for Team China at the 2022 Olympics. Well, the head coach for that team, of course, was Brian Nadolski, who has a lot of connections to players on the staff. Clearly, by trading for Segedi, Segedi was somebody that they wanted to get at the draft, were unable to, and now they get her on this roster for Denisa Shisheva. And I like that trade for Vancouver because you do have a lot of two-way players or grittier players on this roster in the bottom six in particular. And I think Shisheva, as good as she is in that two-way role, kind of filled a similar role to some of the players that they already have in this bottom six. And Segedi gives them another center option, but most importantly, gives them some speed and some skill as a bottom six center or somebody that can play the wing higher in the lineup. She didn't necessarily pop the highest point totals last season at St. Lawrence, but you watch her play, you watch her skill, you look at her history with Adolski, obviously somebody that he trusts and believes in at this level. And Segedi is somebody that I think could be a sneaky good player this season. And I love the fit on the third line with maybe two more physical or bigger players in Brooke McQuigg and Abby Boreen, and what that line could look like was a bit of a smaller skilled player down the middle with Segedi. I really like her fit in this lineup. And I actually quite like the trade for Vancouver. So I think she fits very well into this lineup. I see her as like the third line center going to begin the season. I could see her shifting to the wing and maybe even playing as a complementary piece in the top six if they need her to as well. A player that I think her skill set is very well suited to the style that Vancouver wants to play under Adolski. I like the fit quite a bit for that trade. Continuing on, Dave Shepard on Twitter asking which team, Seattle or Vancouver, projects to have the better first season. Well, I'm doing this question in this video because I think the answer is Vancouver here. I think the best line in the league this season could be Seattle's first line, with Hannah Bilka centered by Alex Carpenter with Hillary Knight on the opposite wing. But I look at the group that this Goldeneyes group has on defense. I look at the coaching staff as well, with Brian Adolski there, who's very well versed in women's hockey, versus Steve O'Rourke, who is coming in with fresh eyes, but maybe will have to adjust a little bit to the game this season. And I just look at the overall depth of the roster. I think there are a couple more sure things in the Vancouver lineup. I look at Seattle. I think they have some intriguing potential, especially on that second line, but they're relying on Julia Gosling to be quite a bit better than she was in her rookie season. They're relying on Danielle Serdachny to be quite a bit better than she was in her first season. I think those players can be that, certainly, and it's something that I'm going to get to in my Torrent preview. But I think the team that will have the better first season is the Goldeneyes, and so that is why I'm addressing that question here in this episode on the Vancouver Goldeneyes one rather than the Seattle episode. So continuing on, the last question here from Jason Trejo Risky on Twitter asking, who will Vancouver name as their first captain and assistants? So the fact that they haven't named a captain this week, I think shows that they're probably going to go the season without a captain, or if they do, it'll be like a mid-season thing, not early on in the year. Because if you do it early on, why not just do it before the season? Every other team in their virtual media availabilities this week had their captain, head coach, and general manager available. The only team that didn't was Vancouver. It was just the head coach and general manager because there's no captain named. And clearly, if there isn't a captain named at this point, I don't think that there will be one named before the season. I don't expect any surprise there, and I don't expect one early on in the season. So the assistants that haven't been named yet, but the players that I would project here, number one, Claire Thompson. Everyone that talks about her talks about how phenomenal a person she is. Medical school student, wildly smart person, and a great hockey player as well. Has a history playing under Kara Gardner-Murray at Princeton. I think she checks all the boxes to be that leader on defense, be a leader in the locker room overall, be a role model in the community as well. Easy pick for an A for me, and I would honestly consider her as the leading candidate to be the captain. I think the only thing that maybe gives me some pause in terms of the captaincy there is Thompson's future in hockey, because she talked about when she returned to hockey in the 2024 draft, playing through the Olympic cycle. And she hasn't really made a determination as to whether she's going to do the medical school stuff and finish playing hockey for now and do the doctor stuff, which is obviously insane, or to continue playing hockey and maybe punt the off-ice career down the road. A lot of that remains to be seen. And maybe determines whether she will be the captain long term, because obviously if she plays longer term for Vancouver, I think she's a slam dunk type pick to be a captain. But do you really want a captain for one season and then she ultimately goes back to medical school and then you have a new locker room leader? There's some things there to work through, but easy pick to have an A on her sweater this season. For me, the second easy pick is Sarah Nurse. She didn't have one in Toronto, which I thought was a little bit interesting at the start, but then you look at the locker room leaders that they had there, and it's pretty easy to see why they went with the group that they did with the letters, and maybe why Sarah Nurse didn't have the letter on her jersey, because the locker room leadership of Fast on the blue line and Turnbull being a leader there, and then at the time Jocelyn Larocque and all that stuff. But I think ultimately the move west, Sarah Nurse is one of the faces, if not the face of this team, as I mentioned. And I think her marketability there, but also her presence in the locker room, some things like that. I think it would be great to give her this fresh start, but also to show that trust in her as that leader, to have her as part of the leadership group officially with a letter on her chest. She's the second one I would go to. And then the third one, a bunch of different options here. You could go to a local product, go to a younger player like Jen Gardner. I think Hannah Miller is a great fit for this kind of role. But I think ultimately you give the respect to Michelle Karvinen, one of the oldest players in the league, as not technically a rookie because she doesn't meet the parameters to be eligible for Rookie of the Year, but a first-year player coming over. Her history in Finland, has played under Brian Nadolski before, all of that. Everyone highly, highly respects her game. I think you show her the respect by giving her an A in her first season in the league. So those are the three assistants that I would go with. And then if one of them gets a captaincy this season, I would look to Claire Thompson to have the C on her sweater. So as I do in every single episode for these season previews, my gals, 3 players on each team that I either believe in more than consensus, or players that I just really enjoy watching kind of lower in the lineup, or players that I believe can take a step up the lineup with opportunity presented to them this season. My first one for Vancouver, and it's a bit tougher to pick some for Vancouver because there's just so many established or bigger names or proven players on this roster. But the first one for me is, of course, Izzy Daniel. Got to see her quite a bit in Toronto last season as a rookie. Just an exciting offensive talent. Of course, won the Patty Kazmaier in her last season at Cornell. I think she's only scratching the surface of her talents in the PWHL. Didn't get into either of the preseason games, so we didn't really get to see what kind of line she would be playing on. Looks like she's probably going to start the season in the bottom 6, but with her skill level, if any of those players that I mentioned earlier, like a Venisheva or a Kava or anybody like that, maybe have a dip in their shooting percentage, or they just look to mix things up or have their talent spread out a little bit more throughout the lineup, I think Izzy Daniel is a prime candidate to take a step up the lineup. I would be intrigued to actually see her and Segedi on a line together and have those two work their magic in terms of their skill and playmaking. But I think ultimately they work on separate lines better in the bottom 6 to give you a bottom 6 with some skill and playmaking on both lines. But Izzy Daniel, a player that whenever she does get that opportunity longer term, or once she finds her groove in the PWHL, I think is going to be a prolific player once she does. A player that I believe in longer term, and a player that I think still has a lot of growing to do in this league. Second for me, going to the goaltending, actually, and it's Kimberly Newell. Kim Newell is one of the best stories this season in the PWHL, playing for her hometown team professionally, hasn't played in multiple years, and is getting to do it for not just her collegiate coach in Kara Gardner-Murray, who's now the GM in Vancouver, but also for her Team China coach in Brian Nadolski. She hasn't played in 3 years. She hasn't played since the Olympics, really, in 2022 with Team China. And what Newell has done in her career is really unique. Like, you look at her numbers at Princeton, great player there. And then she goes to China and plays for the Shenzhen KRS team. Fantastic numbers in the Russian league there, which they were playing in for Team China. And then she goes to China, or she goes to the Olympics for Team China, coming off of a broken ankle, hasn't played in like a couple months before that, and leads Team China to 2 wins in the 3 games that she played in, big wins over Denmark, but most notably Team Japan there at the Olympics, all while still recovering from that broken ankle. I don't know what opportunity she's going to get, just because Kristen Campbell's there as the backup, and obviously Emmerance Maschmeyer's there as the clear-cut starter. But it's great to see that she's just back in the women's hockey fold at 30 years old. I hope she stays in the league for a few years and eventually gets an opportunity in Vancouver. And I hope she pushes Kristen Campbell for minutes as the backup goaltender, to be quite honest, because given her resume, she's a player that would have been primed to step into the PWHL and maybe showcase their skill at a level that they maybe didn't have the opportunity to before at like 2022. Ultimately, she didn't have the opportunity. She didn't go to the PHF or anything like that. But now that she's here in the PWHL as a third string goaltender to start in Vancouver, I hope that she's able to ramp up and eventually get some opportunity to play in this league, because she's a player that has a very unique path. I think has a great story to tell as a result of it, just some of the perseverance there. And I hope she's rewarded with some minutes in the PWHL this year. And then finally, I thought about talking about Anna Segedi here, but ultimately, I think that's more situational in terms of the fit that I think that she's really good in this bottom 6, and kind of already talked about here. Hannah Miller is such a great player. Her path from the Chinese league and Team China to the PWHL to becoming this player that is a legit candidate to make Team Canada for the Olympics is one of the coolest stories in the PWHL through 2 seasons. Without the PWHL, there's no chance that this ever happens for Hannah Miller. The opportunity to play at home as well for Miller is really cool to see this upcoming season. And what she did in Toronto was fantastic. Her 5-on-5 results in terms of her on-ice goal share rivaled that, or better than that even, of Marie-Philippe Poulin through 2 seasons. Her 5-on-5 scoring wasn't quite as elite last season, but her power play results were elite last season. And she was still a good 5-on-5 scorer, one of the best, if not the best, on the Scepters last season, kind of alongside Daryl Watts. A very crafty player on the puck, elite shooter, can play on the half wall, can play in the middle, physical, can play defensively, just ticks every box that you maybe hope for as a coach. And you hear the way that Brian Nadolski talks about her, and you just are super excited to watch her play at home. So even though she's a bigger name player because of her play last season in particular, as one of the top scorers in the league and being one of the big name free agent additions and all that stuff, and being on the Team Canada radar, I still have her in this group for me as one of my gals, because watching her progression over the 2 years to solidify herself as one of the elite players in the women's game after being a player that probably would have fallen through the cracks otherwise, and really was, as a player that played at St. Lawrence, played at the U18 level for Canada, but then wasn't really in that system anymore, opted to go to China with that opportunity, all that stuff. And to be where she is now, I think there's really only like one women's hockey timeline where that happens, and it's really cool that it's this one. Let's continue on to my projected lineup, and it's a lineup that is very exciting. As I mentioned, that connection of Karvinen and Sarah Nurse that they seem to go with a little bit in the preseason, I love that idea. And kind of hearing the way that Sarah Nurse talked a little bit about the excitement of getting to play with Karvinen, I think that that's a great fit. That's what I would go with on the top line. And I think Michaela Cava is the great fit alongside them. You saw her success alongside Kendall Coyne-Schofield and Taylor Heisey the past year. I think you go to that connection with Sarah Nurse on the top line and see if you can round that into your elite top line between Karvinen, Nurse, and Michaela Cava. Second line, then, I would go to two of the local kids and Jen Gardner and Hannah Miller on the left in the center. And then I would have Teresa Vinisheva with them. Vinisheva, obviously a chaotic player, but Hannah Miller, a physical player there as well. We saw Jen Gardner be great alongside Poulin and Stacy last season. Curious to see what Gardner looks like this year without those two. And whether she maintains that kind of form or what she looks like overall. But I think she's a great winger to have alongside Hannah Miller and her ability down the middle. And then Vinisheva, a good complement to both of them as a very good finisher. You have really three players that can put the puck in the net very well on that line, but also Miller and Gardner in particular, two good playmakers there as well. Continuing on to my third line, kind of talked about it a little bit already with the Segedi aspect. I would have Brooke McQuigg on the left, Abby Boreen on the right, and a Segedi in the middle. Boreen, a player that can play physical, has played a lot in terms of a complementary role, cooled off a lot in the second half of last season. I think she fits well with a more skilled player like a Segedi down the middle. And then McQuigg, a great finisher who played in the top six for the Minnesota Frost alongside Kelly Panic and Grace Zumwinkle quite a bit last year. I just really like her goal scoring ability. And I think Segedi McQuigg is a good combination there. And then you can either go with more skill on that line in Izzy Daniel or a bit more of a physical, bigger presence in Abby Boreen. I would lean towards Boreen to at least start alongside Segedi and McQuigg there. And then to my fourth line, I would have Gabby Rosenthal down the middle, Izzy Daniel on the right, and Katie Chan on the left. Chan, a camp standout, somebody that was very good to begin the season playing in Sweden as an undrafted free agent. Only 5'2", but skates very well, has a good offensive touch, a playmaker, and I think that she could work well with Izzy Daniel on the opposite wing, or if you swap Daniel up to that third line and have Boreen play more of a fourth line role, could bring some more speed to the line alongside two bigger players in Rosenthal and Boreen. I'm fine with Boreen and Daniel in either one of those spots. But yeah, that's the lineup I would go with. Overall, a well-rounded, balanced lineup there up front. And then on the back end, Claire Thompson, Ashton Bell, easy pick on the top pairing. Thompson gets to play on the left side, of course, after playing a lot last season down the stretch with Lee Steckline, and both of them kind of sharing duties on the right side. Ashton Bell, really good playoff run alongside Jocelyn Larocque. A player that I think has a bit more offense to show in the PWHL, but I think that's a very well-rounded offensive and defensive pairing to go with Thompson and Bell. Second pairing, Channel Watkins and Jakes. Channel Watkins and Jakes played so much together over the past two seasons, but in particular last season for the Minnesota Frost. Just a pairing that works very well with Channel Watkins, very content to stay back and be that defensive defender. And then Sophie Jakes would be that offensive run and gun type, push the puck up the ice, be that shot generation machine in the offensive zone. That's pretty easily the top four for me. And then to begin the season, Emma Greco with Sydney Bard on the third pairing. I would push Nina Jobe-Smith likely onto that third pairing with Emma Greco when she's available. Madison Samoskevich played defense quite a bit at Quinnipiac last season, actually switched to center. I think she's the easy bet to be the extra skater in these lineups, to mix in on defense if you need her to, or to be that extra center. Very versatile player that's going to benefit her with the PWHL, allowing the extra skater to be dressed versus the NHL. And then, of course, in between the pipes, it's Maschmeyer, it's Campbell, and it's Newell. So what does this ultimately look like in the PWHL this season? One of the best teams in the league. There's going to be a target on their back just as one of the expansion teams, but as one of the teams that is projected most to win the PWHL. I have their range as first to fourth. I think the only way they finished fourth in this league is if there's a couple of injuries, or if the travel really gets to them, or if things just don't really go smoothly on the back end. There's a few ways that I could squint and see it, but ultimately I think this is a top 2 seed team, and I think they win the regular season. I don't have them as my Walter Cup winner, though. I already said that Montreal Victoire is that, so sorry about that for the Goldeneyes fans here watching this one. But I do think they're going to be a formidable out or formidable team and a tough out in the regular season. I've got them winning the regular season, getting to pick their poison in that first round series. Going to be a very tough regular season with that travel, but I think you look at the depth of this lineup, you look at the mix of player types and skill. You look at the defense, you look at some of the youth, you look at some of the veterans there, you look at Adolski and kind of his history in women's hockey and the great coach that he is. You look at Kara Gardner-Murray and the great job she's done building this team. All of that comes together to me to be one of the top teams in the league. First seed for me in the regular season, not the Walter Cup winner, though. For me, I still have the Victoire doing that this season. But very excited to watch this team on the ice. I love the branding. I love the logo, all of that. Pacific Coliseum is going to be a great home as the primary tenant, the first ever for the PWHL. Puck drop tonight against Seattle. I can't wait for it. It's one of the games that I've been waiting for all offseason long. And of course, for you Vancouver fans, you've been waiting even longer than that to finally get a team in the PWHL here. Well, you've got it, and it's playing tonight if you're watching this the day of. And if you're not watching the day of, well, that means you've already watched this team play. So thank you for tuning into this one. It was very fun to preview this Goldeneyes squad. If you haven't already, check out some of the other season previews I've got for the rest of the teams around the league. But that's going to do it for this one. Again, thanks you for tuning in. Very excited to watch this Vancouver Goldeneyes team. I hope you are as well. And I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.